Andy Johnson, Minnesota State University. We are looking at comprehension today. Here are some ideas I'm going to try to hit. This is a recording of a webinar that is going to be done or was done on February 25th. It starts out with comprehension. Let's understand reading first. That's the basic of it all. Now, there are two views of reading. This is one, the phonological processing model. It's a simple view of reading. Here, reading is thought to simply be sounding out words. So the emphasis is on sounding out word instruction. Good readers, according to this model, are good sounder-outers. Okay, sounder-outers, sounder-outer those words. No. All right, that's Latin. And unless you know Latin, I am guessing most of you are kind of reading word by word, and your eyes are kind of going like this and back and forth quite a lot. You're probably replicating your reading what a struggling reader is. Now, if reading were simply sounding out words, you'd be able to sound out those words at the same rate as you sound out these words. It is not. It is more than that. But what about all those very important things on the scope and sequence chart? The controlled R, the diagraphs and triagraphs and all those things that are so important on these very important scope and sequence charts? Aren't they important? Shouldn't we teach them in a predetermined order? Well, how important are these letters? Let me give you an example, shall I? I wrote the following note to the students in one of my teacher education classes. Now notice, I've given you a little background information right now, so you're going to use what's in your head to make sense of the next sentence. So take a minute and read that. I am guessing most of you could get most of the words. I gave you the background information. This is a wonderful class. You're going to be great teachers. Wonderful human. All right. Now, the first and last letter were the same in both sentences. It was the middle letters that were scrambled. All right. So are letters really all that important? Doesn't mean we shouldn't teach them. We shouldn't over-teach them. Do students really need to know what a controlled R vowel is? I don't even know what that is. And I can read. What is the deal? This is what reading is. And it's the neurocognitive model. Reading is not sounding out words. It is creating meaning with print. It's a thinking process versus a responding process. Meaning we have to do something with our brain. As a matter of fact, speaking of brains, what's in our head transacts with what's on the page to create meaning. Meaning does not reside on the page alone. We use what's in our head to understand. As a matter of fact, neuroscience has shown us that almost 10 times more information is flowing from the cortex down than from the page up to the thalamus. All right, they've done the little light up the brain sorts of things. Almost 10 times more is flowing down to make sense of what's on the page. This is called the neurocognitive or the psycholinguistic model. It describes the reading process. Here's the data, goes into the thalamus from the senses, that's the relay station, and then 3 cueing systems are used to cue the brain into what the word is, and I'll show you that in a minute. But the important thing is data going up and almost 10 times more data coming down. Cueing systems are the parts of the brain that are used to recognize words during the act of reading. Recognize is different than identify. Okay, recognize as you see it, you instantly know what it is. Identify is it's in your brain lexicon, but you have to use some strategy to figure out what it is. Right? So they're cueing the brain as to what that word might be. You're doing that right. Now, yes, there's phonological and letter cues. That's very important. That's that graphophonetic there. Semantics. We use context or meaning of the sentence to figure out what it is. Now notice in that teacher letter, I gave you some context. I said this is a letter to my class. So you had some context, semantic clues to figure out what it is. And syntax, grammar, and word order. Of these three cueing systems, the phonological is the least efficient in terms of how much space it takes in short-term memory. Does not mean we shouldn't teach phonics. It means we should include activities and instruction to develop all three cueing systems. But wait, you're asking, don't you have to be able to accurately identify all the words in order to comprehend? That's my question. Well, there's a minimum word accuracy threshold that's needed for comprehension. You do have to identify some words, but there's not a direct causal relationship between the ability to sound out words and comprehension. Word identification does not cause better comprehension. However, comprehension does influence your ability to identify words. So, one study that shows the limits or limitations of word accuracy, and research is good. There's a lot of different kinds. Kusser, Stephen, he has a lot of interesting research related to this. Now, some background information. The focus of this study was on expository text or information text. Starting in 4th grade, students encounter more expository text, information, than narrative text. They're reading about things versus reading stories. There are reading to learn versus learning to read. That happens about in 4th grade. Now, the thing about expository text, they have more lexical density. That's a fancy way of saying more information is packed into each sentence than narrative text. So comprehension is a little bit different. Now, in this test, this research, they looked at 4th grade students. They had them read aloud some expository text, some information text. And they did a miscue analysis. A miscue is when what is read, what the students read aloud, does not match what's on the page. For here, Lars was a big doggy. He said doggy instead of dragon. That is a miscue. Call them miscues. There are different kinds. They looked at meaningful miscues, which maintain the author's meaning. If, for instance, the kid said the dog ran down the street versus run, the dogs will run down the street, they are still maintaining meaning. That's a meaningful miscue, and those actually are good things. A meaning disrupting miscue is when the author's intent is disrupted. If the child said ran instead of dog in a sentence, well, that would not at all be what the author meant. That would be a meaning disrupting miscue. All right, so they read it aloud, did a miscue analysis, and then they used story retellings to assess comprehension and recall. It's a story retelling, or it's a retelling, not a story retelling, because they were using expository text. And they looked at the number of clauses students were able to recall, and they did comprehension tests as well. And this is what they found. The clauses with more meaningful miscues were more likely to be remembered in the retelling than clauses with no miscues. There was 100% word accuracy. So clauses in which students had meaningful miscues versus 100% no meaningful miscues were more likely to be remembered in the retelling. So for comprehension and recall, accuracy in maintaining meaning was more significant, more important than accuracy in word recognition. And we get all hyped up about correct word recognition. We give them lists of words out of context, and we evaluate them. This is because in a meaningful miscue, the reader is reading at deeper levels and producing alternative ways of expressing the same idea while reading. The focus is on the idea and not necessarily on the word accuracy. So meaningful miscues, that tells us that the reader is relying on semantic and syntactic clues, not just the phonological or letter clues. So what you say? So what? Reading is creating meaning with print. We said that. So instructional strategies should be those that focus on meaning. These are more important than strategies that focus on word accuracy for creating meaning. And comprehension is creating meaning. So we want strategies that focus on maintaining meaning. I'm not saying that word accuracy should not be addressed, but it should be put in context. So the question is, and the reason we're here tonight, how can we improve students' ability to create meaning with print? Some basic ideas and then some specific strategies. First, do not overcorrect oral reading. And I know that's hard when they're reading out loud. You want to jump right in there. But we want to give students the chance to use metacognition, to listen. Does that make sense? And then to do fix-up strategies. You will find if you just control yourself and don't jump in there, most of the times students pause when they have a miscue. They realize it doesn't make sense and they go back and they correct. We need to strengthen and give them practice doing that. There are times you have to, students aren't standardized products. There are times when you do not want to frustrate them or you do correct, all right? But don't overcorrect. Fourth grade and up, the focus is on informational books. And we already mentioned that students start to read to learn. So they need to be taught some specific comprehension strategies for expository text. I call them study skill strategies, and that will be the topic of our next webinar. You have to teach them that they approach textbooks differently than storybooks, that you do not read them the same. There are study skill strategies. We use them with textbooks, but not storybooks. Study skill strategies should be used for textbooks, and that's the subject of our next webinar, as I said. Now, when you're doing comprehension activities to improve comprehension, that's our goal, you want to do this with text that's at their independent reading level. That's where they can read 97% or more of the words. That's so they're focusing on comprehension and not word identification. You have to separate comprehension work from word identification work. So you're using text. If the goal is to improve comprehension, you don't want them struggling with the words. Comprehension worksheets do absolutely nothing, well, maybe a little bit, to help students comprehend. They should more accurately be called remembering worksheets or go back and find the answer worksheets. They do not improve the cognitive process. Reading is a thinking process that's used to create meaning with print. So here are a couple ideas. Now, these are for emergent or beginning level readers. Now, when you are at this level, beginning and emergent, you want to focus on sentence level activities and paragraph level activities. That's the focus. And you'll see that when you read a lot of the emergent beginning books. They have 1 or 2 sentences per page. It's hard to sometimes create good comprehension activities for the whole book. So we focus on sentence and paragraph ideas. Here's a simple one. Post-reading activity, sentence mix-up. You have sentences related to the story. You put them out of order, and they have to put them in order. This is metacognition at the level of the sentence. Does it make sense? Post-reading, sentences related to the story. You could have this on a computer, a sentence strip where you cut up the words, and you could save these and use them from book to book, year to year, etc. This should be simple and quick. This activity maybe take 3 to 10 minutes at the most. Post-reading maze, same thing. You create sentences related to the story, and you have either 2 or 3 alternatives. They are reading the sentence, comprehension at the sentence level, all right, and they have to find the word that makes sense. Now, when you do maze, you want to have 2 words that have the same grammatical function and one that has a different function. Molly blank to climb. She slips to climb. She likes, she locked to climb. All right, so they're reading it and they're seeing which word makes sense. That is comprehension at the sentence level. Post-reading, sentences related to the story. Now, most comprehension, these next ones could be used with students 3rd, 4th grade and up. Most comprehensions, you need to do something both pre and post, or pre, during, and post. You should not simply do a post-reading activity. That does not engage cognitive processes. You want students to read with purposeful intent, and I'll use that word a lot. So at the beginning, before they read, they're reading with purposeful intent. There's some purpose for doing that. These activities can be adopted for all levels, emergent through graduate school, and adopt and adapt everything. And you'll notice I use a lot of graphic organizers. Graphic organizers are any graphic or visual thing that organizes thinking. And comprehension is a thinking process. That's why these are so important and useful. Here's a great one to use with readers at all levels, pre and post confirmation. It's a series of declarative statements. At least one of them is not true. You read them through as a pre-reading activity. So students now have a sense of the story. As they go through, or maybe after, this can be used during or after, they mark the ones. So at pre-reading, I read through them and I say, which ones do you think is true? Yes or no? So they're making a guess. Which of these characters are in the book? What do you think? Here's one that's a little better. I actually use this one. Abigail Adams. I use this with a 3rd grade student. Abigail learned to read in school, and before reading, they say yes or no. These sentences are all related to the story. As we go through them, it gives the reader a sense of structure of what the story is about. So it's a scaffolding as well as a comprehension pre-post. So we go through them, and then either during or after, they have to correct their mistakes. That's confirmation, pre and post. That can be adopted. That is a very good one. Here's another simple one, identifying story grammar. Story grammar is the structure of the story as a pre-reading activity. And I keep it simple, focus just on characters, setting, and events. All right, just those 3. You go through a partially completed story grammar chart. And depending on the level, that depends how many events you leave blank. Boys and girls, in this story, there are 2 characters, Biff, and I tell about Biff, and Molly, tell about Molly. This story takes place on the sidewalk. As we read, we are going to look for 3 important events. Gave them a sense of structure, and now they're reading for purposeful intent to identify and write down on this graphic organizer 3 events. Pre, it could be done during, whereas when they find it, they record it, or it could be done post. Story grammar. Here's a modified one. Maybe I want to just give the characters and 2 events. Modify up and down. You don't have to do all 3. And here's one modified even more. Characters, tell about the characters, and we have to decide which of these occurred. And I'd read through the 3 events, and they simply put a check mark. Modified even further. All right? Always adopt and adapt. With older students, you may want to use a story grammar web, where you go through the title, maybe 1 or 2 settings, and they put an arrow going out, events and characters. This is just a more visual display. This tells me a lot more about how that student is comprehending the story narrative text. Cause effect is great. Looking for cause effect is another one of those cognitive processes. So the first one is cause effect for cause. You read through 2 causes. Causes is what happened, what makes something happen. Effect is what happens. All right. So as a pre-reading, you go through these and you say, we need to find out what happens. Bob stood up on the bus. We need to find out what happens. That's called the effect. Space aliens grab Bob. We need to find out what happens. We're going to write down the effect. Now they're reading for purposeful intent. Some teachers want to have the page number to really get them grounded in the book, and that's fine too. Simply add the page number. But they're reading for purposeful effect. In the same way, a cause-effect chart for effect. Boys and girls, in this story, Bob was slammed to the floor. We have to find out what caused that. The spaceship dropped Bob. We have to find out what caused that. Reading for purposeful intent. And again, you can have the page number. So cause, effect for effect. And cause, effect for cause and effect. You can do cause and look for the effect. Effect, look for the cause. All right? Adopt and adapt. I would do this after doing just the other two several times. Adopt and adapt. This is a great one. This can be done, I would say, emergent through graduate school. Okay, those are some simple strategies. What about documenting growth in comprehension? All right, standardized tests, yes, there's some of that, but they are limited if that's all you're using. They're like a snapshot in time, in one particular time. The best way to document growth is to get a sense of the student over time instead of a single snapshot. Often in these standardized comprehension things, they have to read a paragraph and fill in a bubble, or read a short paragraph and answer questions. Okay, that's not the same as reading a complete text. On anything, students' ability to comprehend, to create meaning, is impacted by vocabulary, if they're familiar with it, content, familiar with it, the types of sentence structure, their interest in what they're reading, and their emotional state on that particular day. That's why I say standardized tests are good. You have to include them, but they're snapshots, and you should always include more. You should always have snapshots. I believe you should include more direct forms of assessments, and I'll give you a couple things. These are little snapshots over time. Here's the analogy. If you wanted to find out, get a sense of the soil in someone's lawn, you take little soil samples at different places. You wouldn't dig it all up. That's the same with documenting growth. Little samples over time, much better than one big test to define a student's ability to comprehend. Here's some ideas for more direct forms of documentation. Of course, a completed story grammar chart where you have the story and the level, grade level or Lexile level or whatever you want to do. This gives you a sense over time if they're able to comprehend those things. Or a completed story web. Little bits of this every 3 weeks or so gives me a better sense of that student's ability to create meaning with print than a standardized test does. Here's one that is a maze. This enables you, a maze is simply a completed text, a short story, and every either 5 to 7 words is a target, maze target that has 3 words, and they have to circle the correct one. So the student is relying on syntactic and semantic information to create meaning. This is a more authentic type of measure. It's more direct because the student is actually directly reading something. This can be administered to a group, which many people prefer this, and it is a validated form of comprehension. This is a maze test. And you can create your own, you can get them online, and I avoid the number of errors because we're not looking at errors if you're measuring comprehension. If you're measuring comprehension, you should do nothing with fluency or word identification. Those are other things. So avoid that. And then retelling charts of some kind. These can be individually administered. They take a little bit more time, but they give you a more accurate sense of that student's ability to create meaning with print. All right, this is a nonfiction retelling chart, and you check silently, orally, text read to the child. That gives you a sense of their listening comprehension. Title and reading level, and you put the topic that they're reading about, or the title, and you identify a couple of key concepts, and then specific facts related to that. Is this a bit subjective? Yes, but all measures are a bit subjective. That's why we don't rely on a single measure. We look at many different things. You identify concepts. You decide there could be 3, there could be 2, there could be 10. And important ideas that support that concept. In the retelling, you would say, Bobby, tell me about Amphibians. What are 3 things we need to know about amphibians? And if the child gives it to you unprompted, you put a little check there. If you have to give it a little reminder, a check there. Unprompted, they get 2 points. Prompted, they get 1 point. You count up the total points, and independent level is 90 to 100% accuracy. So if they're reading at grade level 3, they get 90 to 100%. They can comprehend at the 3rd grade level. Know that word identification and comprehension levels are often different. For example, students can often, word identification is at the 2nd grade level and comprehension may be at the 3rd grade level or the 1st grade level. It's different. Children are not standardized products. This is for nonfiction. For fiction or retelling, a little bit different. You have the characters, setting, and events. Tell me about them. What characters were in this story? Where did it take place? What are important events happened? Some people just say retell the story, and they give points for all of these. I give them tell me the characters, the setting, the important events. Same way. All right. Just some ideas on comprehension. Hopefully you got some more understanding and some ideas to help students enhance their comprehension. There are ideas in both these books, and next month's webinar will give you some more ideas on comprehension, and I'm going to focus on study skill strategies for students from grades, I would say 3, 4, up to graduate school.